Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Here we go. It is showtime. This is podcast number 3 in the last 36 hours, based on the way things have been going. Because we did the pre-debate show yesterday, then we did the post-debate show, and now we're back into the regular routine. Welcome in, Dave Trafford here, and we're pushing right through until the 28th of February, so we'll wrap things up the day after the election. But in the meantime, this is the final sprint of sprints as we head into the last 9 days on the campaign trail. And it'll be interesting to see how the direction each campaign takes. The ad spends, we'll get into some of that, and we'll also do a bit of a recap on what happened last night around the debate table. Joining us today from Powergroup Communications and host of the O Show, it's Laura Babcock is here. Bob Richardson joins us, public affairs consultant, knows a thing or two about the war rooms and what goes on in campaigns. Brian Lilley in the house from the Toronto Sun, and former Toronto Mayor, Deputy Mayor Anna Bailao here, giving you a bit of a boost on the resume here. But anyway, we're all good to go, and thanks for being here. I just want to go quickly around just to get top line. I don't. It's interesting to me because we did the show last night immediately after the debate, and there was a certain consistency, I'll say, Bob, in the assessments of the debate performances. And now, after everybody's had a chance to regurgitate some of the video clips, some of the audio clips, some of the radio commentary, I'm hearing a slight change in the views of how things went based on how people are consuming some of the commentary, 18 hours later.
Yeah, I think I'm a little less harsh in my commentary too, as well. First of all, I thought the premier did what he had to do. I thought he was disciplined. He didn't take the bait, particularly from Ms. Crombie. He was focused, almost machine-like, in terms of being focused. And for that reason, he did what he had to do and did it relatively well. Merit Stells, I thought she had a good night. She's smart. She's nice. She's hardworking. I think she shows that she's empathetic and cares. But there's nothing that she left me that I remember. So I don't think she's punching through in terms of message. Bonnie Crombie, I thought, was hot and maybe too aggressive. She was kind of on and off aggressive. She did make some good points on healthcare. And she did take it to the premier in a way that a number of people today seem to like it. Although last night I didn't necessarily like it on TV. I think that's to your point, Dave. And Mr. Green, Mike Schreiner, affable, folksy, nice guy, but he just doesn't punch through.
Yeah, Laura, when we looked at what was going on immediately, and I thought, oh, get off your notes, when Crombie was kind of getting ready for her first big answer, and that was a challenge, and again, the initial response was Bonnie came out too hot, too angry, too aggressive, but what I'm hearing today is a lot of those clips are what captured the media attention, and that's what's getting played, that's what's getting in front of people. So maybe it needed a good 18 hours to breathe for her.
Well, this is the attention economy we're in, right? It's all about getting people to actually watch your clips. And so coming out hot, passionate is going to play better when it's all being chopped up and distributed the next day. And I actually made the comment while I was watching it last night with my partner. And I said, it's not so much about the actual performance, because who's going to sit through the whole thing? I mean, did we all sit through it? It was quite difficult. We're going to watch it through clips, right? It's going to be disseminated through influencers. It's going to be picked up for the gotcha moments. And so that kind of passion with Bonnie that seemed like nerves last night, it kind of went between anger and some moments where she was actually quite charming, but she definitely seemed very, very, very passionate. that was a little at times cringe watching the debate, but the next day, those clips are the ones that take off. It made her look like she was in the fight. And I think that's what she had to achieve with the night. I mean, because let's be real, going into this thing, we knew that Merritt, as lovely as she is and as poised as she was, the NDP is not really viable. We've seen it in the polls, and we haven't really seen her distinguish herself as a leader the last couple of years. We know Mike Schreiner, super nice guy. I mean, who doesn't like Mike, but he's not going to take the Greens into even a minority status. And then you've got Bonnie, who was the one that the Ford campaign was obviously spending huge ad dollars against for months. They defined her before she got a chance to define herself. She had to come out looking like she wanted it the most. She had to come out looking like she had the most passion for the gig. And I have to say, the comment off the top that Ford was almost machine-like. Yes, he was on message. He wasn't particularly flappable, but he also wasn't that folksy, charming, hey, shucks, aw, shucks, guys, Ford that we used to see. It's as though he thinks he's got this thing in the bag, and he probably does, but it didn't look like he was working for the voters. And it didn't look like he wanted to convince them to vote for him. He kind of took it as a fait accompli. And that's a little off-putting. So when you juxtapose the Bonnie kind of nervous passion with Ford's kind of, yeah, I have to be here, but not longer a minute longer than I want to be. I mean, it might hurt him a little bit. And I just want to bring it down, to boil it down, if I can, to one moment in the debate. Had nothing to do with their policies, because we're pretty clear on where everyone's staking their ground. It was that question about what would you cook for the others if they came to your house, you know? And Ford said mac and cheese and threw it out there. And then you had Bonnie go on for, you know, what seemed like 30 seconds about learning at the foot of her grandmother in the rooming house and making these Polish delicacies. And I can tell you that resonated with people I talked to today. They felt like she was really someone they could connect with. So Ford might have been a little too slick by half last night.
Well, one of the things, though, that we have to really kind of realize is that he was on his heels to some degree. I get what you're saying in terms of, you know, having these short answers and maybe appearing to be overly glib, but he was on his heels, particularly around the healthcare, I thought.
It would take an additional $12 billion just to get us up to the average. That's why you have rural hospitals closing their services. That's why 2.5 million people don't have a doctor. We need to make the investments that the Ford government has failed to make.
The healthcare crisis that we are in right now, the hallway healthcare crisis, was invented by the previous Liberal government. But Doug Ford and his government have poured gasoline all over it. We have a crisis in our province right now. He can talk about how much he's spent on healthcare, but the reality is, you know, talk to any Ontarian about the state of our healthcare crisis right now. It's terrible.
I'd like you to look into the camera, and I'd like you to tell the people at home who lost loved ones while they were on the wait list what you did over the past 7 years to fix our healthcare system, because it's broken. We're in crisis, and you're bragging about what you've done. It's been an abysmal failure.
Doug Ford?
Oh, Bonnie, what I will tell you, there's a reason why Dr. Jane Philpott, a liberal minister, comes to our team. It's very simple, because she sees the vision. She sees that we're building healthcare. She sees that, again, backlog surgeries. You know something? We have less backlog surgeries per capita than anyone in the entire country.
So Brian, he's good at that. I mean, he's that pivot is just such an art form for him, and he's able to turn on that because he's vulnerable on healthcare. I mean, any premier would be. It doesn't matter when you serve in this province, you would be vulnerable on healthcare.
Yeah, I can't remember an election that I've covered in this province or elsewhere where the healthcare system has not been in crisis. So I think to some degree that that's kind of baked in and people discount it. So I know I don't believe any of them on healthcare, and they kind of their answer on how to fix it all sounded very similar about how many thousands of doctors they're going to hire. And I think that you say, okay, well, you're going to all do the same thing on healthcare. I thought that Stiles in that exchange came out very measured, very good. Not as passionate as Bonnie Crombie, but and maybe not as clippable. But I thought she sounded really good. Ford, you said he pivoted, but I mean, for all the problems in the healthcare system, they do have a good story to tell on some of this, including The fact that they are able to say we've got more people connected to family doctors than any other province and things like that. And he didn't have that information at his fingertips. He could have been stronger on that than he was. But, I think they all just wash each other out. And as far as mac and cheese, if he had done that, folksy Laura, I think people would still be talking about it. But he just kind of, mac and cheese. He should have said, well, I don't really cook much, so I'll make you a box of KD. And people would laugh. But you're right. He wasn't that folksy guy.
Even to the point where when they asked him, if you got a weekend off, what would you do? And he just went right down the lane and said, oh, I never take a weekend off. I'm always hardworking. And there was kind of, well, I get it. But I mean, at some point, where is that sort of, every one of us would welcome a weekend off every once in a while, and we would do something special. So it was funny how he was in the zone so much on that. The one that came up, though, that I thought everybody was waiting for a big swing, and he, oddly enough, he failed at the answer but got away with it. And it was the whole question of what would he do on the green?
Doug Ford, I'll turn to you. Would your government build housing on the green belt?
No, and I think it was pretty clear. I said I was, then I wasn't, and I went ahead and did it. But in saying that,
let's give him an opportunity to respond.
Something, I apologize to the people. Unlike any of you, when you do something, you don't want to apologize. I apologize to the people. We're moving forward. We're building homes. I find it very rich that Bonnie Crombie say she builds homes. She built the least amount of homes in the entire province. Just compare to the new mayor. The new mayor has done more. Carolyn Parrish has done more in 7 months than you did in 10 years.
So he's gone from fumbling. I mean, a complete I don't know what he meant by his answer on the green belt.
That was horrible.
But then turns it into firing slings and arrows at Bonnie Crombie.
It's true. He did fumble. It was a bad answer, but he went back at the fact that he apologized. And people like the fact that he apologizes. And he knows that. He knows that resonates well with people. He's done it more than once. I don't know how he keeps getting away with it, but he does. And people appreciate that in him. And so he turned that around. I was actually surprised that the leaders of the other parties didn't come back to it, but they kind of allowed him to get away with that answer. And he turned it quite around. Dave, I must say, going back to the overall debate, I think nothing changed yesterday. I got to the office this morning and I was asking around, actually, because I knew we were going to do the podcast. And I was asking, did people watch it? What did you think? And people are like, no, it's going to be what it's going to be. And there's 1,000 other things that people are looking at and wanting to talk about, and which it's mind-boggling, because there's such issues like the healthcare, like the housing, that, major responsibilities of the province, it's been really hard for the other party leaders to come after the government during this election. And I think that, as it was said here, they all did what they kind of had to do yesterday, but nothing has really changed. I think Bonnie did show that she was in the game. I agree with Bob. Mara, she was nice, but I didn't take anything out of it. I think Schreiner, to me, I still have the guy from the last election, so I was kind of disappointed. I think he did much better last election during the debates. I think he's been disappointing me this election a bit. And Doug was just Doug on point, kind of like, I have bigger issues to deal with. Get me out of here. That's a feeling I got. I have bigger issues to deal with. This election needs to get done, but I need to get out of here. That's the feeling I think he wants people to have, is like, listen, I'm the premier. I have the tariffs issue to deal with. This is something that we need to go through. And which should not be allowed. Like, we didn't have to be in this election if it wasn't for him. So don't consider it as a distraction, because if we're here, it's because of you. And so I think that the leaders needed to come back at that, and they didn't. They didn't come back at the green belt. They didn't come back at that. There was quite a bit on healthcare, but I think he got away fairly easily. And I think his campaign is pretty pleased with the whole performance yesterday.
Yeah, well, and Bob, it brings us back to the question of, are we kind of 2, 3, 4 steps behind in terms of the modern campaign. Laura already talked about, so that attention economy, that area where we need to be able to pinpoint what we have to say, get in, get out, move on. We're relying on clips. The debates don't really have the kind of function that we would have expected to have had in the last, in the 90s even. I mean, I can't think of a debate in this century so far, we're a quarter of a way through it, where it really has done what we wanted it to do. And that is ostensibly to explore issues and really let them talk about what they want to do, why they want to do it, and how they're going to do it.
I think we're hugely dated. I think the format was not great last night, and parading in various journalists and things like that. I don't think helped it. I don't think the open debate, which was just a screaming session to those of us watching, was a complete turnoff. So it's not good TV. It's not particularly informational, and it's dated. So we got to figure out how to do that better. I mean, the way in the U.S. campaign, the things that were impactful was the Joe Rogan kind of interviews and things of that nature, long podcasts where candidates got an opportunity to speak for a while, and I thought it was effectively used by the Republicans. And we should be moving more towards those things and less towards this kind of stilted thing where you're asked what your first job is and stuff like that. I don't care what your first job is. I want to know what you're going to do to fix healthcare. So it didn't know whether it wanted to be the social or debate, and I think that's a big problem. And that's what we saw last night. So I think people were probably quite disinterested at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's not a surprise for. I mean, we rinse and repeat. I don't know how we expect a different outcome from any of these the debates. And to be frank, this gets, I don't know if you've been involved in the conversations with the consortium, the media consortium, and the political parties. It's just a rat's nest in terms of trying to come, it's the old line about, you get the committee together to design a camel and they come up with a horse, right? So
well, Dave, I have had I was going to say the pleasure, the honor, but I'm not sure, looking back, of moderating many televised debates at the federal and at the local levels, and it is a tough gig to moderate, and the rules of the debate matter. I mean, think about it this way. You had a premier who's been in for 7 years of majority government. So obviously all of the attacks should be towards him, although Merritt made a mistake going after Bonnie at one point, I thought. But they should all be after Ford. But every time Ford's name gets invoked, he gets more time. Like, it didn't make any sense. It was ridiculous, right? And so, I mean, but I think it matters how he came to the debate. I mean, I've even talked to business leaders, people who I presume are Ford fans and conservatives. They didn't like this election being called. They didn't think he needed another mandate. He still has time in his current mandate. They don't like the expense of it. And it does seem highly cynical based on the Trump tariffs. I mean, his closing argument to Ontario wasn't about all the things he was going to do better on critical files like healthcare and housing. It was about, Trump tariffs, Trump for however many years, Trump tariffs. And you know what? The people of Ontario are intelligent. We understand that this Trump issue is going to be a long time issue. We're not going to decide every single election just on that. We also want to know some other things that affect our lives. And one of the things that you came away with watching last night was that the three other parties were concerned with things like ODSP rates. They were concerned with things like affordable housing and homelessness. And what you heard from Ford was really tunnels and roads and policing. And that might be what plays to his 18% that got him in the last time. But I think that it doesn't speak to how much the people of Ontario deserve. And so I would have preferred to have seen a premier who was more aware of the broader issues facing constituents. I think there's a lot of people in Ontario who might want to park a protest vote against Ford. Just say, you know what, Trump tariffs, you went down to Washington, didn't net anything. How much money did that cost us? And also, what about all these other things? What about these huge waits in emergency rooms? What about the 81,000 people who are homeless in this province? I mean, he has failed to even meet his own housing targets. He's failed on the Eglinton Crosstown, getting that done on time. He has had problems as premier. The Ontario Science Centre and Ontario Place These are things people are deeply mad about, including the Greenbelt. The reason he got off on the Greenbelt was because his answer was so ridiculous that I don't think the other parties knew what to say. I mean, it reminded me of that I was against it before I was for it comment from a U.S. presidential debate, I believe. I mean, he wasn't prepared for that answer, didn't take the question seriously. And I think people of Ontario want a premier who's going to take our budget seriously, not overspend as he has, take our housing seriously, our hospitals, our neighbors and homelessness. All I got from Ford last night was, I want to build my roads, I want to do my things with Trump, and this whole thing is a waste of my time. I don't think that's a good look. So I think he's more vulnerable after last night. I don't think it came out as, nothing changed. I think he came out looking a little more craven.
Well, Brian, here's my problem, and I don't necessarily disagree with anything that Laura just said, except that was the role of the opposition around the table, to hold him to account on all of that stuff. And they haven't done that. For example, every time Doug Ford brings up Bonnie Crombie's taxing record at the city of Mississauga and says she's going to tax us into, oblivion, she took the bait and actually argued with him on the municipal government angle, as opposed to saying, I had to balance my budget every year. What the hell are you doing by overspending? There's an opportunity there for her to hold him to account. And that's just one example where they didn't do any of that.
Bonnie Crombie started to use what I think is her best line of attack last night. And I thought, well, if she's used it before, I haven't heard it. So where was this 3 weeks ago? And that is, he didn't get it done. His campaign last time, the whole slogan was, get it done. Now, they can point and say, well, we've started on this and we've started on that, and we're moving forward on this. Okay, but is it done? No. Okay, so that leaves a line open for attack. Crombie hasn't done that. Doug Ford, like a lot of political leaders who are successful, is benefiting from a very weak opposition. The NDP's never been able to get their act together since the 2018 election. If they were smart, they would have stepped on the throat of the provincial Liberal Party and just kept putting pressure on until it stopped breathing. And then Ontario would be like every province west of us, where it's pretty much a two-horse race. But last night in the debate, you're right. She could have not taken the bait. Ford didn't take the bait. A leader like that, when you've got, 2, 3, or sometimes at the federal level, 4 opposition leaders facing you, that's your favorite spot. That's what you want, and you want them all yelling at you, and you just have to stand there and be calm and smile once in a while and get it over with, and then you do okay. So I disagree with Laura. I don't see anything changing from that. Bonnie Crombie came out today and started saying that she's going to appeal to NDP voters. I'm sorry, but the biggest pot of voters is with the PCs, who took a lot of people that used to vote Liberal. You want to get them back. You don't want to chase the shrinking pool of NDP voters if you want to win, which tells me she's just going for second place at this point. As far as the whole attention economy that we were talking about earlier, I was looking down at my phone to see the clips. Bonnie Crombie's got about 4 or 5 clips from last night. The most popular one has been seen 36,000 times. Merritt Stiles has about the same number, the most popular one about 48,000 times. Those aren't bad numbers. They're better than the number of people who watched the debate online from what I could find on YouTube. So they're going to be grabbing some people, but Ford's numbers on those are when I look them up, they will be much higher. Of course, he's the premier. He's going to have a bigger audience, just like Justin Trudeau does, or what have you. But they need bigger numbers to punch through on social media. That's what they're doing on X right now, is about 4 or 5 and hitting about 30,000 people. They need more.
Anna, just a comment on the
go ahead.
Bonnie going after the NDP and Merritt, as Laura said, going after Bonnie. That's the feeling I think people are getting, is like they're going at each other instead of going for the government. I mean, the campaign was a month. We're in the middle of a campaign. Why are you going at each other instead of going after the government, and the government that you are already having a hard time punching through on the issues that you need to, on the healthcare, on the housing, on the issues that he's vulnerable on? And instead of going at each other, why aren't you going after him? So I think that there's this feeling, people are starting to have this real feeling that is like, okay, the real race here is between who's going to be the official opposition, which should not be at this point in the campaign. Maybe 2 or 3 days before the campaign, but at this point, I don't think it's a good feeling to give people out there. I think there's still 9 days, more than a week, and anybody involved in politics knows that a week is a long time.
Well, but Bob, I mean, the interesting thing is in terms of timing. Bonnie Crombie dropped that little nugget at the end of the debate last night and talked about appealing to the NDP. And then in Hamilton today, almost the first thing out of her mouth was exactly
and
that.
That's why I'm reaching out today to NDP voters, and I'm asking them, if you want to change our healthcare system, please vote for Ontario's Liberals. And together, we can change the government.
Aside from the nervous looks behind her and the tepid applause, I just didn't light the room up. But you've been in the strategy room. Somebody said, okay, this is the time to do this, and there had to be a show of hands to say that this was the right call.
Yeah, I think there's no question about that. But let's cut Bonnie Crombie some slack here. She's been the leader of the Liberal Party for a year and a half. She's been bombarded with hundreds of thousands of dollars of negative ads. They've spent 50 cents on Merit Styles. She
on who?
Exactly. She inherited no organization. They called the election a year and a half early, so she didn't have a chance to get off the ground in terms of policy, candidates, finances, etc. And frankly, she's still standing, and she's the number 2 in the race at the moment. So I think we have to acknowledge that.
Exactly, Bob, 100%, and she's going up, and her numbers are going up. No question about that. And I think she did what she needed to do yesterday, for sure.
Yeah. So I think she's doing. Is she perfect? No. Was that a great performance last night? In my opinion, no. It was too hot. There were a couple of things with it. I thought it looked like it was under-organized. I've done 2 or 3 leaders preparation debates, and I thought I would have picked that up or this up. And it was not perfect, but I think she's done a pretty good job against a relentless opponent. And also, let's also remember, this election is, in my 40 years of doing stuff in Ontario, I cannot recall an election that's been better gamed than this one has, from right from the start, from government advertising, free checks in the mail, trips to Washington paid for by taxpayers, a whole variety of other things that have gone on. This one has been gamed since day one. It's been gamed to have a low voter turnout, which it will, and it will likely and by the way, it will likely succeed. And kudos to the people around Premier Ford who are smart enough to figure it out. But I'm not sure that's great for our democracy, and I'm not sure it's great for our province, and I'm not sure it's great for political discourse in the long run.
So bring me back though to this strategy at this point in time where we're going to say I'm appealing to the NDP. Is this a like we're going overboard here otherwise?
No, who knows? I'm not privy to the numbers, and I'm not involved in their campaign. But I would think they know that they're in tough. Polls are coming out that shows Ford ahead by a fair margin. I think they're trying to, at a very minimum, make sure that they get 20 or 25 seats, and that she secures her seat, and they win. They fight another day. The other thing they could be doing is they think that they're okay at that level now, and they're trying to take it from 25 to 40. That's the type of thing that you're trying to do, I think, at this stage of the campaign, and they're trying to make an addition to the size of the pot, not a subtraction.
Yeah, Laura, one of the things that I keep hearing coming up is that dealing with the big number, the horse race number right across is one thing. We all know that the Liberal vote isn't as efficient as they're saying as the NDP or the Conservatives. There is real worry being expressed that Crombie might not even win her own seat.
Well, I mean, that would be a bit of a surprise, but let's talk about the NDP strategy for a moment. Brian mentioned earlier that what she really wants to do is pull some of those sort of soft Ford conservative votes. Yeah, sure, that'd be nice, but I think that she's got more fertile ground with a lot of people who are disenfranchised from the NDP. I mean, the NDP in Hamilton Centre, the NDP riding where Andrea Horwath was forever, are in the middle of a huge fight. Right. And they've split off the candidates there. So, I mean, that's territory for the Liberals to come in and say, hey, if you want to stop Ford, which I can tell you is an overriding principle in Hamilton, if you want to stop Ford, then, I'm here. I'm letting you know, Hamilton, with all your NDP seats, that you can find safe harbor in the Liberal Party because we're in extreme times. And Ford, has got a lot of things that he's doing that are hurting, especially people who are not wealthy in this province. Right. The 900% increase in terms of renovictions in Hamilton, some insane numbers. I mean, housing policies and policies around taking off rent controls and not properly funding ODSP have had a deleterious effect on Hamilton and other municipalities across this province. So she's coming into the NDP hotbed. And I can tell you, up on Hamilton Mountain, there are a sea of red signs all over the mountain, and it went NDP the last couple of times. So I think that they're looking at some numbers maybe internally saying, Ford only won by 18. He got, 18% is what gave him his majority. So many people didn't come out to vote. And yes, he is gaming this election. There's no doubt about it. Shortest month of the year, snow, all the rest of it. But, people might feel played by this premier. They might not like the gamesmanship going on. And if they want to send a message to him, it looks as though by the numbers and by last night's performance that Bonnie's a place to put that vote. So I totally understand her campaign saying to all the NDP voters, that they're not going to make it. We can possibly make a difference and hold Ford's feet to the fire. And I have to say one thing, strategically, psychologically, because Ford invested so much money attacking Bonnie, and last night where he did kind of get his back up, it was against Bonnie, just the way he said her name. She gets under his skin, and that looks to other people who don't like Ford as, oh, she's the one he's afraid of. Maybe she can beat him, or I'd like to see them across from each other at Queen's Park. And when Bonnie delivered that line towards the end, where he was saying she didn't do a very good job as mayor, and she said, well, that's not what you said when I was mayor. And she kind of went back at him and just kind of showed a little bit of his soft underbelly of how afraid he is of Bonnie Crombie. So I think that sent people a message. If you want to send Ford a message, you do it through the Liberal Party.
When she went at him on the person that he was a silver spoon person,
Yes.
I thought she was going to get him then. Knowing him, I thought, okay, this is it. Doug is going to come out. But he did well. He kept his cool. He didn't take the bite. But I thought she might have gotten that got you moment at that point in time.
She compared him to Trump, and that played very, very well on social media, let me tell you.
So when we talk about this next phase then of the campaign, Brian, we're going to look at where the ad spends are going to be, the nature and the tone of those ads, where the leaders are going to be. And there is this already, the conversation as to whether or not the Liberals and the NDP are going to spend more energy going hammer and tong at each other versus, taking on Doug Ford. To Laura's point around the vulnerabilities in Hamilton for the NDP, it's worth noting, Toronto, I think, has 9 NDP members. And so today, as we record this, Marit Stiles in Toronto making her pitch.
Doug Ford has spent the last 7 years treating Toronto like his personal political playground, settling scores, meddling in municipal affairs, and making life worse for the people who actually live here. Well, I'm here to say, it's time for a change. It's time for a premier and a government that's on your side.
And Brian, when we look at the numbers and the way they're playing out in Toronto, Nanos has the Tories just bumped up slightly, just the day before the debate, but they're up above the Liberals. So that becomes an interesting play in terms of what does the Toronto map look like vis-a-vis the NDP, never mind the Liberals.
Well, the Conservatives took half the seats in Toronto in the last election. Will they pick up a couple more? Perhaps, perhaps somewhere like Toronto St. Paul's, where the Conservatives won federally. They might win that. That's currently held by the NDP. But the fact that Merritt Stiles was in the belly of the beast, right in the core of downtown Toronto, campaigning, 2 stops today. I was like, ooh, okay, maybe things aren't going well. Normally we look for where the leaders are going, and we try and make sense of it. And in most campaigns, that makes sense. Bonnie Crombie going to Hamilton Centre, where the NDP is having a civil war. Great move by her. And yes, she could pick up Hamilton Mountain, my old riding, absolutely. But I was noticing some weird things with where the Ford campaign was going. And so I was talking to one of their guys, and because I was looking at doing a story on that. Isaac Callan from Global, just through the wall behind me, he did that story. And I was like, well, this isn't making sense. And they said, we're trying to go to ridings where we're not pulling people away from going door to door and knocking. So the Tories have actually been going to some ridings like Guelph and Ottawa-Vanier, where they have no hope, where they don't even plan on winning, but they've got to do a campaign stop somewhere for the media attention, but they don't want the workers coming off of the door knocking of trying to win a riding next door that they could. So this is in many ways, on top of what Bob said and the whole gaming thing, this is a very bizarre campaign from start to finish. But the polling, only Main Street really has, I'm just pulling it back up here, only they really have the Liberals at 30 or above. Everything else is, 26, 27. Relay Strategies, which is run by the woman that used to work for David Hurley, Kyla, I'm forgetting her last name. She used to do the polling for Kathleen Wynne. She's got the Tories at 47 and the Liberals at 26, but the NDP at 20. If the NDP performs better, they might be able to keep their official opposition status. If not, if they keep performing so poorly, not only does Bonnie Crombie get the Liberals back to official party status, but there'll be official opposition. How big? As Bob said, are you going for 25 seats or you're going for 40?
So, Bob, what does it tell you about that NDP stop in Toronto and the focus there? I mean, she had all of the local MPPs around her, and it looked very impressive and a pretty, if you want to talk about a seasoned crew behind her, it's quite a credible lineup. But it's hinted to me, as seems Brian, that there may be some real worry there about what they're managing in Toronto.
Yeah, I think they're got some problems in St. Paul's as an example. Liberals have got a good candidate in there. They've got that. In University of Rosedale, it's very competitive. In Fort York, it is competitive. There's a couple of seats in Scarborough that are competitive. And against the Tories, the Liberals are competitive in the Don Valley. So I think she's trying to keep the NDP vote up. If you keep the NDP vote up, the Conservatives are likely to take the Don Valley seats, which is better for her than for the Liberals to take them, and the other seats she's defending. So I'm surprised she's in here as much as she is, and doing as much work as she is. But I think they've got some problems in Toronto, and I think it's a little bit more complicated than people think.
Yeah, it's interesting, Laura, once we get down to this point, it's almost like you're going to get to a point in the campaign where they need more than one leader to go out and actually talk to the people in some areas, because last time we saw the margins in some of these ridings were very, very, very slim. So, you can have the count at the end of the day, and it's a majority government with this on that and the others with the opposition. But some of them were very slim. So it's going to be a dogfight.
Yeah, and we talked about Bonnie in terms of her performance relative to her time as leader, but let's also talk about the headwinds, or what's happening with the bigger picture. I mean, part of the narrative in these analysis shows for the last 6 months have been, well, she's suffering from the Trudeau effect, right? But now that, as we saw Mark Carney do a couple of those long form interviews with Rosie Barton recently and with The Daily Show, he could get a Liberal majority potentially by some of the polls if he were to run against Poilievre right now. So I think that there's a bit of that win behind her now, where people aren't looking at the Liberal brand as being toxic. They're looking at it as being maybe back in the game. I think that helps a lot. And, in Ontario, and I've had Merritt on the O show and I've asked her about this, that I moved to Ontario literally the day after Bob Rae won, and everyone was in shell shock. They couldn't believe it. And that still hangs over this province. It blows me away, but there's a certain demographic that won't let an NDP run the province because of that legacy. And Merritt tried to, talk it away. But I think that when the Liberals look like they're viable, that is a threat to Ford, hence him spending a fortune trying to define her. And I thought it was really a miss to go back to the mac and cheese thing, because you've heard so much about how Bonnie's got some house in the Hamptons, even though we know he's got his Muskoka mansion, right? But to hear her talk about making pierogies with her grandmother in a rooming house, I think for a lot of Ontarians, that kind of shattered this myth that Ford had painted about her. And when she said, what have you ever worked for? You were handed a company. She made the kind of Nepo baby comment towards him. It allowed her to show that she's, a hardworking child of immigrants. And honestly, that plays. I mean, it played really well in our household seeing that. So I wouldn't discount the next little while yet for Bonnie to maybe, of course, not beat Ford at this stage in the game, but to be able to give Ontarians a viable place to park their vote. If they're not feeling the NDP and they're upset with Ford, which many people are, then I think that Bonnie might do better than we expect. Will she get to 40? I doubt it. But, like I said, a sea of red is popping up around my parts.
Well, and I think 40 is quite hopeful, and we'll put that to be polite. But because the seat projections right now have 338, it takes all the numbers. They've still got the Liberals, floating in around 12 or 13.
I was going to say it's 8 to 10. Second tranche is 20 to 25. Third tranche would be 40. I don't think we have to spend a whole lot of time on the third tranche right now.
Okay. Anna?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. But I think that, looking at those numbers, but looking at what we were just talking about in here, and somebody that has been involved in politics a lot in Toronto, the fact that the NDP is putting that amount of resources in incumbent seats in the area here, they're losing terrain. And in most of them, some could go Conservative, most of them is a fight between the Liberals and the NDP. So they could get some momentum in Toronto. It'll be really interesting to see, the next few days. I think that the Conservatives are going to be spending. They have a lot of money in the coffers, and the next few days are going to be ad crazy, and it's going to be towards the Liberals. So everything that has been gained now, a little bit of momentum, all the clips with Bonnie going after the premier, which is kind of like people are enjoying that, as you were saying at the beginning of the podcast. I think it's going to be, challenged with a lot of ad time that they're going to buy against her again, because I think the NDP does have a ceiling in this province, and the Conservatives know that. And so they want to have the Liberals down as much and as long as possible. And so they're playing for this election, but to be honest with you, they're playing for the next 4 years and the next election. That's what they're doing. They're already gaming it for the next time. They're not only going for this election. The strategy is more than just this election. And so all this ad time, all this stuff around the Liberals is not only February 27. It's the long game that they're playing now. But I agree that we could see the Liberals coming out with more than just the 8 to 10 if they start getting some wind in their sailing over the next few days. And there's still 9 days, and I think she is getting a bit of momentum.
Well, Brian, we've alluded to it more than one occasion during the course of this series, and that has been that it's almost and we say what we will about the Liberal campaign. But to Bob's point, it's, new team, new leader, and it's in a relatively short period of time and an early call. So let's put all that into the basket and stir it up. The problem has been the NDP have had runway since, 2018 and have not taken good advantage of it. Andrea Horvath, come and go, Marit Stiles.
Dave, I have to jump in. They're still trying to figure out who they are.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They have spent all of this time.
Figured out all this time who they are.
It's been wasted time. So to my point being, it might look on paper as though they're stronger than they should be. The idea that they need ground game, and I don't know, to Anna's point, where are they going to find the ground game to actually cover all the bases? And that's why I'm saying you might need more 2 or 3 Marat Styles out there to cover all the bases.
You think of Doug Ford's first year, and Andrea Horwath was still doing pretty well as opposition leader. By the time she left, she looked like she looked like in the last election, please get this over with. I want to go. She looked like she was done. And, you know, I know that some of the, every party has their challenging candidates and people. I believe some of them were getting under Horwath's skin at that point. But in 2018, she wasn't like that. And they had just won big, and Doug Ford's first year was a disaster. And I'm looking across the office at the French toast mug. Someone took the front page of the Toronto Sun when we had Dean French's face on it and said French toast because he was forced out. And, you know, think of that. They couldn't capitalize then. They never crept up the way they should have. They didn't control the narrative. They didn't prosecute the government the way they should have. And they haven't been able to do it since. Too often, you know, you want to talk about who they are. Too often, the NDP at Queen's Park, if you watch Question Period, if you go to the scrums after, you think you're talking to a lobbyist. No offense, Bob. You think you're talking to a lobbyist for the public sector unions. That's, you know, I'm sorry, if you want to grow, and politics is about addition, not subtraction, you want to grow, you have to talk about something more than Bill 124. An important issue? Sure. But they have not attempted to grow their base. They have at times been one issue. And so I think that's why they're in the state they're in now. The whole idea of, you know, how well Bonnie Crombie's doing. Yeah, she's only been leader for a year and a half. But the party, Bob mentioned this briefly, the party structure has completely fallen apart. And it needs to be rebuilt. We think in, you know, people that aren't as involved as all of us in politics will often think, well, you just need a new leader. No, there needs to be an infrastructure to support that leader. There needs to be organizations in each district to run the local elections. And that simply isn't there for the Ontario Liberals in many parts of the province. And so it's really unfortunate for her. You know, she needed the next year and a half to be able to do that before the scheduled election. She didn't get that. She needed a strong team around her. Some of them have been distracted, at least in the early days, maybe not now, with the federal Liberal leadership. I know some volunteers were off on that when the election was called. Maybe that had something to do with Doug Ford's date choosing. I wouldn't want to.
Brian,
I wouldn't want to impugn the Premier's motives. But if I can say something,
you're in a short line, pal.
I think we've all established what's going on here. I just want to say something, an area that we should watch that we haven't discussed yet, because it is Ontario's second biggest city and the most ignored city in provincial politics, and that's Ottawa. There are several seats without incumbents there. You've got Carleton, where Goldie Gamari was. That's going to be won by the PCs. They've got a councillor there, George Theroux's running. But Nepean, where Lisa MacLeod was, is up for grabs. That could go Liberal or PC. You've got Ottawa West Nepean. Chandra Asma was there. She's not running. That race, I was hosting radio at CFRA in 2018 on the election night, and it kept rotating between all three of them. And when I went off air, I think Bob Shirelli had won the election. And no, by the time I got home, the NDP were ahead. And then I woke up in the morning and Jeremy Roberts had won it for the PCs. That one can go one of three ways. Karen McCrimmon out in Canada, that could go back to the PCs. That's going to be a tough fight. And then you've got Ottawa Centre, where Joel Harden has left to seek the federal nomination. That's probably going to stay NDP. They've got a former mayoralty candidate, former councillor running there for the NDP. But there'll be a lot of shakeup in Ottawa, and that you know, depending on how the shakeups go, could be answering questions on election night of how many seats the parties have in that opposition stack.
Mm. Yeah, it's not. I guess we get so focused on 905 and GTA, Bob, that you know, that what the calculus that Brian just laid out there is probably unique to this election, but nonetheless important.
Yeah, I think it is. Ottawa is important in this election. I pretty much agree with your analysis, although I think the Liberals will pick up Nepean.
They could, yeah.
They're running the same candidate they did last time. He lost narrowly to Lisa MacLeod, and he's been running ever since. So, all things being equal, he probably has a very good shot at winning. Ottawa West Nepean, flip a coin. It's that sort of a seat. And the other one, and I think Colonel McCrimmon will have a race on her hand out in Canada too. I think it was a good smack of the government for a by-election. Let's see if she can hold it in a general election. So that one is by far not decided yet. So.
All right, well, let's leave it there. That was good. I quite enjoyed the rehash of the post-debate conversation. But it really was interesting to see where the leaders were going, what you guys had to bring to the table. So Laura Babcock, Bob Richardson, Anna Bailao, and Brian Lilley, thank you all for being here. It's always good fun. Good voices on the Ledger Ontario Politics podcast. And we will, as I said, push this right through until the 28th of February. And we'll have the post-election show there and go through all the entrails and tea leaves as the case may be. All right, that'll do it for us. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. If you've got a thought, you can offer it up in the comments. Otherwise, you can go to my website. I've got a talkback button there. You can leave a message at davetrafford.com, and we'd be happy to entertain your thoughts and ideas in the course of programming upcoming. Otherwise, you're listening on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, or from time to time on News Talk 1010. Thanks for being here. I'm Dave Trafford. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast for Story Studio Network.
This is SSN
Story Studio Network.